My mother-in-law poured me a cup of tea the morning I came home from the emergency room and smiled when I couldn't lift it without my hands shaking. She called it a shame. She said it loud enough for my husband to hear from the hallway. Then she pulled out her phone and typed something with her thumbs before I could read her face. I was 31 years old. I had built my own interior design firm from a shared desk in a co-working space to a 12-person studio with a client waitlist. I had a trust fund my father left me when he died, structured carefully so that control would only transfer to a spouse or guardian if I was declared legally incapacitated. I know that now. I didn't know it then. All I knew that morning was that my hands wouldn't stop trembling. My hair was coming out in clumps in the shower drain, and the neurologist had written the word idiopathic on my chart 3 times in 4 months, which is a medical way of saying he had no idea what was wrong with me. My mother-in-law had been living with us for 7 months by then. She arrived 2 weeks after my father's estate cleared probate, carrying 2 suitcases and a folder of herbal supplement regimens she said would help me with my stress. My husband told me it was temporary. He said it with the same tone he used when he told me the business credit card he'd attached to my firm's account was just for household emergencies. I want to tell you something about the way certain people move through the world. They don't announce themselves. They don't slam doors or throw things. They settle in quietly, like water finding the lowest point in a floor, until one day you realize the foundation beneath you has been rotting for years, and you were standing on top of it the whole time, wondering why everything felt slightly wrong. My mother-in-law made me tea every single morning. Loose leaf, she said. Better for inflammation. She had read about it somewhere. She brought it to me in the same white ceramic mug with the chipped handle, and she stood in the kitchen doorway while I drank it, watching me with the patient, careful expression of someone waiting for a specific result. I thought she was being attentive. I thought that was what it looked like when someone tried. I was wrong. The episode that sent me to the emergency room that 4th time was different from the others. I lost feeling in both feet, climbing the stairs. I sat down on the 4th step and couldn't get back up for 20 minutes. My husband drove me to the hospital. My mother-in-law stayed home. When we returned, she had reorganized my home office. She told me it was easier to find things this way. She handed me the tea. The neurologist on call that night was a woman I hadn't seen before. She looked at my chart, looked at the pattern of symptoms across the 4 visits, and she went very still, in the way doctors go still when something clicks into place that they don't want to say out loud yet. She ordered a talk screen that none of the previous doctors had ordered. She asked me, quietly, who prepared my food at home. She asked if I took any supplements. She asked if the supplements had been given to me by someone else. She told me the preliminary results would take 48 hours. My husband was in the waiting room scrolling through his phone when she walked me back out. He stood up and put his arm around my shoulders and asked what they found. I told him they were running more tests. I watched his jaw tighten for exactly 1 second before he smiled and said that was fine. They would figure it out. I didn't go back to sleep that night. I lay in the dark next to him and stared at the ceiling and thought about the folder my mother-in-law had brought with her. I thought about the supplements she measured out herself, every morning, before the tea. I thought about the fact that my symptoms had started approximately 3 weeks after she moved in. I thought about the way she watched me drink. I got up at 4 in the morning while my husband was asleep and I went to the guest bathroom where she kept her things. I photographed every bottle in her cabinet. I photographed the folder. I photographed the label on the loose-leaf tea container. Then I went back to bed and I didn't say a word. The next morning I poured the tea down the drain while she was in the shower. I replaced it with water from the tap. I kept the mug in my hand and carried it to my office and set it on the desk where she could see it was empty when she checked. She checked. I called my father's attorney that afternoon from my car in the parking garage beneath my studio. He had handled the estate and he knew the trust structure better than anyone alive. I told him what the neurologist had asked me. I told him about the talk screen. I told him I thought I needed someone on my side before the results came back, and I needed to understand exactly what my husband would gain if I were ever declared legally incapacitated. He was quiet for a long time after that. Then he told me to come in the next morning and to not discuss this with anyone in my household. What I learned in that office rearranged everything I thought I knew about the last 7 months. The trust my father had structured was worth just under $2 million. If I were declared legally incompetent, control would pass to my husband as next of kin. My mother-in-law had accompanied my husband to a meeting with a different attorney, one I didn't know. Approximately 6 weeks before my first emergency room visit, my father's attorney had contacts. He made calls. That other attorney specialized in guardianship law. I sat in the leather chair across from his desk and I felt the specific, nauseating clarity of understanding something you can never unknow. My husband hadn't married me for love that ran out. He had married me for money he planned to collect while I was still breathing. And his mother had moved into my home to make sure the timeline moved forward efficiently. The talk screen came back the following morning. Thallium. A heavy metal that accumulates in soft tissue. Causes hair loss. Peripheral neuropathy. Tremors. Difficult to detect, unless you know to look. Odorless. Tasteless. Easily dissolved in hot liquid. I sat in my car for 45 minutes after the doctor called. Then I dried my eyes and I started making a plan. Here's what most people do when they discover something like this. They confront. They scream. They call the police immediately, or they call their mother, or they throw things across the room and demand to know why. I understand the impulse. I had it sitting in that car. I wanted to walk into my own kitchen and put everything on the table and watch them explain themselves. But I had watched my mother-in-law operate for 7 months. She was not someone who panicked. She was someone who pivoted. The moment I showed my hand, they would pivot. The husband would play the devastated, concerned spouse. She would produce a story about contaminated supplements and manufacturer error. They had an attorney already. They had a plan already. And I had trembling hands and a talk screen that a good lawyer could argue was inconclusive, pending further testing. I needed more than proof. I needed a trap they would walk into themselves. I stopped taking anything she gave me. I told her the neurologist had recommended I pause all supplements while they ran tests. She smiled and said, "Of course." That made complete sense. Her eyes didn't change when she smiled. They never had. I had simply spent 7 months choosing not to notice. I hired a private investigator the same week. She was a woman in her 50s who had spent 20 years in insurance fraud before going independent. And she had the specific, unimpressed energy of someone who had heard every possible version of human betrayal and found none of them surprising. She put tracking on the vehicle my mother-in-law used. She began documenting the meetings with the guardianship attorney. She found the financial records. What those records showed was this. My husband had borrowed against his personal credit lines to the edge of their limits. He had opened 2 accounts I didn't know about. The guardianship consultation had happened twice, not once. And my mother-in-law had purchased, in cash, from a garden supply store, in a town 40 minutes from our house, a compound that contained thallium sulfate, used historically as a pesticide, discontinued for consumer use in the United States in the 1970s, still available through certain specialty suppliers if you knew where to look. She knew where to look. My father's attorney worked with a forensic accountant and a criminal defense contact who explained our options carefully. We could take what we had to the police immediately. That was the clean path. It was also the path where my husband lawyered up within the hour. My mother-in-law denied everything, and we spent 2 years in a contested proceeding while they argued the exposure was accidental and the financial planning was coincidental. Or we could do it the other way. The other way required patience. It required me to keep living in that house, sleeping in that bed, drinking tea that was now just water, and acting as though I was getting worse instead of better. Every morning she measured out supplements I never swallowed. Every evening, she watched me move through the house with the careful attention of someone tracking a slow decline. I gave her something to watch. I held the walls when I walked. I let my voice go vague when she asked how I was feeling. I told my husband I was scared. He held my hand and told me everything was going to be okay. He looked me in the eye and said it. I looked back and said, I believed him. The investigator documented everything. The continued meetings with the guardianship attorney, a consultation with a physician my mother-in-law had approached independently about the criteria for incompetency determinations, a conversation in a restaurant where she told a friend, caught on directional audio, that the situation would resolve itself within the next few months, and her son would finally be able to breathe. 6 weeks in, we had enough. My father's attorney contacted my husband directly. He told him there was a complication with the trust administration. He said he needed both my husband and my mother-in-law present because there was a document discrepancy that required family clarification. He used the word urgent. He used the word timeline. He knew which words would move them quickly. They arrived together. My mother-in-law wore the navy blazer she wore whenever she wanted to appear credible. My husband had his hands in his pockets, the posture he used when he was trying to look like he wasn't nervous. My father's attorney sat across from them at the long conference table, and he laid out 2 scenarios with the practiced gravity of a man delivering difficult news. He explained that the trust had an acceleration clause. If the beneficiary's health declined below a documented threshold within the first 3 years of the trust's activation, the structure could be challenged and the transfer to a guardian could be delayed by court review for up to 4 years. He watched them absorb this. My mother-in-law leaned forward. He continued. He told them there was an alternative path. If there was documented evidence that the beneficiary's condition was self-inflicted, the result of substance misuse or deliberate self-neglect, the competency transfer would be expedited. He said the word expedited slowly. He said the court could move within 60 days. He set a yellow legal pad on the table, and he told them he would need sworn statements if they had any relevant information about my history, my mental state, my habits. He told them he was not advising this. He was simply informing them that the option existed. My mother-in-law picked up the pen before my husband did. She described my drinking, which was not a thing that existed. She described episodes of erratic behavior she had witnessed, events that had never occurred in any room in any building. She described finding pill bottles she had allegedly discovered in my office, which was information she had apparently been preparing to produce because she had her phone out and photographs ready. She said she had been worried about me for months. She said it with her hand pressed flat against her chest. She said she had been trying to protect her son. My husband nodded along to every word. She signed the sworn statement. He signed a corroborating declaration. The door at the side of the conference room opened. I want to tell you what my mother-in-law's face did in the moment she saw me walk through it. It didn't collapse all at once. It went through stages, the way a building comes down in a controlled demolition, floor by floor, from the top. First confusion, then a rapid, visible recalibration, then the thing underneath everything she had always been, which was a cold, assessing fury that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with the recognition that she had miscalculated. I crossed the room and set my phone on the conference table. The audio had been running since they sat down. Every word of the sworn statements, every fabricated detail delivered with a hand on the chest and a concerned expression. I looked at my mother-in-law. I looked at my husband. Neither of them spoke. Then my husband spoke. He told me I had forced his hand. He said it the way people say things when the mask is gone and there's nothing left to maintain. He said his mother had only been trying to help, that I had never appreciated what his family had sacrificed, that the money was going to sit in a trust doing nothing while I ran a business I didn't need it for, and that didn't make sense to anyone who thought about it practically. Practically, my mother-in-law said I was ungrateful. She said my father had spoiled me. She said the supplements had been for my benefit, and whatever the doctors found was not her responsibility and could not be proven to be intentional. The detective who had been standing outside the conference room door came in at that point. He had 2 uniformed officers with him. He informed my mother-in-law that she was being detained for questioning in connection with criminal poisoning and conspiracy to commit fraud. He informed my husband that he was being detained for conspiracy and for the sworn false statement he had just signed. My mother-in-law stood up and her chair scraped loudly against the floor. She looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face in all the months she had lived in my house and prepared my tea and watched me drink it. It wasn't anger exactly. It was something older than anger. It was the specific look of a person who believed they were owed something by the universe and had just been told, definitively, that the universe disagreed. She asked me how I could do this to my own family. I told her I had been asking myself the same question about her for months. The officers walked them out. I stood at the window of the conference room and watched the parking lot. I felt something I had not felt since before my father died, which was the particular quiet that comes after a long, loud thing has finally stopped. The legal process that followed was not fast or clean. Nothing like this ever is. My husband hired an attorney, who spent 4 months arguing that the thallium exposure was environmental, that the guardianship consultations were exploratory and not evidence of intent, that the sworn statements were made in good faith, based on genuine concern. His attorney was good. The evidence was better. My mother-in-law had purchased the compound. The investigator had the receipt and the supplier records. The garden supply store had camera footage. The guardianship attorney's consultation notes, subpoenaed by the prosecution, documented a conversation in which my mother-in-law had specifically asked how to establish the appearance of cognitive decline in a subject who was otherwise healthy. The subject. That was the word she had used. Not her daughter-in-law. Not my husband's wife. The subject. She was convicted on 2 counts of criminal poisoning, 1 count of conspiracy to commit fraud, and 1 count of filing a false sworn statement. She was sentenced to 11 years. She will not be eligible for parole until she has served at least 8. My husband pleaded guilty to conspiracy and fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence. He received 4 years and was ordered to repay every dollar he had moved or borrowed against assets connected to me. The divorce was finalized 3 weeks after his sentencing. I kept the house. I sold it 6 months later because I didn't want to live somewhere that had his mother's fingerprints in every room. I kept my firm. I kept my clients. I kept every person in my life who had known me before he did and had watched the last 2 years with the quiet alarm of people who saw something wrong but couldn't name it until I named it for them. People ask me if I feel sorry for him. They ask it with the slight tilt of the head that means they think the correct answer is yes, because he was young, because he was influenced, because his mother was the architect, and he was only the collaborator. They want me to make a distinction between the woman who poisoned me and the man who watched it happen from 3 feet away and held my hand and told me everything was going to be okay. I don't make that distinction. He knew. He knew from the first consultation. He drove me to the emergency room 4 times and came home each time and sat down to dinner across from the woman who had done it. And he passed the breadbasket and talked about other things. That is not a man who was led astray. That is a man who made a calculation and decided I was worth less than the number in the trust document. I sleep well. I slept well the first night after the sentencing, and I have slept well every night since. My hands don't shake anymore. My hair came back. I walk upstairs without holding the railing. There's a letter that arrived at my studio about 8 months after the trial. It was from the correctional facility where my mother-in-law is serving her sentence. Her handwriting on the envelope was the same as it had always been. The same careful, upright letters she used to label the supplement bottles she kept in the guest bathroom. I held it over my paper shredder for about 4 seconds. Then I fed it through. I am not telling you this story because I want you to admire what I did or feel satisfied by what happened to them. I am telling you this because I need you to understand the specific mechanics of this kind of betrayal. The kind that doesn't come at you loudly. The kind that comes wearing a navy blazer and a concerned expression and a cup of tea in a chipped white mug. The kind that takes months to build because it needs you to stay comfortable while it works. My mother-in-law was not a spontaneous person. She was a patient one. She had assessed the situation, calculated the variables, and moved into position before I had any reason to be watching. That kind of person is not an accident. They are the product of a lifetime of practice on smaller targets who never fought back. And if you are in the presence of one right now, I need you to understand something that took me 23 months to fully accept. The first thing is this. Proximity is not evidence of safety. We have been taught, most of us, that the people physically closest to us, the ones in our homes, at our tables, in the family photographs, are the ones we can trust. We treat closeness as a credential. We hand over our routines and our patterns and our health records and our estate documents to the people who are near us, as though nearness equals loyalty. My mother-in-law was in my house for 7 months. She knew every room, every habit, every supplement I had ever taken. That proximity was not a sign that she was safe. It was a sign that she was thorough. Distance is not the problem. Motive is the problem. Learn to look for motive in the people who are already inside your perimeter. The second thing is this. Kindness and care are not the same action, and your body already knows the difference. I drank that tea every morning for months, and something in me went slightly wrong every time she handed it to me. A wrongness I dismissed because she was smiling and warm and the mug had a chipped handle that made it look domestic and harmless. We have been taught to override the signal. We have been taught that suspicion of people who are kind to us is paranoia, ingratitude, a failure of generosity. But there is a difference between someone who is kind and someone who is performing kindness as a delivery mechanism. Your nervous system registers the difference before your mind does. If something feels like it is slightly off and you cannot explain why, that is not a character flaw. That is information. Take it seriously before you have to take it to a hospital. The third thing is this, and it is the one that took me the longest to stop fighting. You cannot negotiate with someone whose plan requires your destruction. I spent months, before I understood what was happening, trying to make my mother-in-law like me, trying to make her see me as a person worth having at the table, worth bringing tea to, worth treating as a member of the family, rather than an obstacle to one. I adjusted my behavior and my tone, and the amount of space I took up in my own home, trying to find the version of myself that would satisfy her. There is no such version. There never was. Her objective required that I become small enough to be managed, and no amount of warmth or effort on my part was going to change that objective. The only move available to me was to stop trying to be acceptable to someone who had already decided what I was for, and to start being dangerous instead. I have a new apartment with windows that face east. I have a studio with 12 people who are good at what they do. I have a financial advisor who knows the trust structure better than anyone now that my father's attorney has walked me through every line of it personally. I have my health. I have friends who call me on Sundays and ask how I am, and mean it in the ordinary way, not the way a person means it when they are tracking a decline. If there is someone in your life right now who is tracking your decline, I need you to hear me. It does not matter what they call themselves. It does not matter what you are told you owe them. It does not matter how long they have been in the room or how warm their expression is when they hand you something to drink. What matters is what they are building while you are not watching. And if your instincts have been telling you something is being built, the time to start watching is right now, before you are sitting in a hospital bed wondering why your hands won't stop shaking and everyone around you looks just a little too relieved. I am not the person she tried to make me into. I am not the subject. I am not a line item in someone else's plan. I built something from nothing before any of this happened, and I am still building. And the only difference is that now I know how to recognize the people who arrive with luggage, and a folder of supplements, and a very particular kind of patience. Don't wait for a talk screen to tell you what you already know. I am living proof that you can survive even when someone gets very far down the road before you catch them. But you will save yourself so much if you catch them sooner. Trust the feeling before you have the evidence. Document everything. Know what you are worth on paper, because the people who want it already do. And if they come at you quietly, with tea and a smile and a plan that requires you to slowly disappear, let me tell you what I learned in the cleanest way I know how to say it. The most powerful thing I did was not the trap in that conference room. It was the morning I poured the tea down the drain, said nothing, and started watching back.